So today I'm going to be talking about Hyperion by Dan Simmons. It's time to get hyperbolic about Hyperion because I can't believe it's taken me so long to read this sci-fi masterpiece. Originally published in 1989 and winner of the Hugo Award, this is one of 4 books, but basically this series, the Hyperion series, is made up of 2 duologies. So you've got the first 2 books which are very much connected, and then another 2 books which are also connected. Taking place in the 29th century across a galaxy-spanning civilization called the Hegemony of Man. Central to the story is the planet Hyperion, which is known for its mysterious time tombs and this kind of enigmatic creature called the Shrike. The novel is framed around the pilgrimage of 7 people travelling to Hyperion. And not only does the journey itself throw up different challenges for our pilgrims, but each pilgrim gets to share their own story, a kind of backstory of their lives, a backstory of what has led them on this pilgrimage to Hyperion. In essence, the structure is very much following the Canterbury Tales. The book is also very closely linked to the epic poem by John Keats of the same name. I'm not going to break down the connections between Keats' epic poem and this novel. However, if you are really interested, I strongly recommend you check out Kieran from KD Books' review of this novel, in which he spends pretty much the whole video breaking down those connections. So yeah, of course, if you want to check it out, which I strongly recommend you do, I'll leave a link down below. I think in order to get a good understanding of what this book is about, we first have to dive into the characters and any individual stories that each of those characters tell. In essence, this is a book of short stories with a really intriguing framing device, as well as some fantastic world building. So let's take a little look into the characters and their individual stories. It's worth noting that before we go into each of these individual characters, all of them have some form of a connection to Hyperion. All of them have a reason for why they have been picked to go on this pilgrimage, but also why they want to go on this pilgrimage. First up, we have Father Lenar-Huit, a priest torn between faith and despair. His tale explores themes of sacrifice, sin, and redemption as the complexities of his relationship to the Catholic Church and the cruciform parasites on Hyperion builds. Next up is Colonel Kassad, a battle-hardened soldier who's haunted by visions. His story combines hard military sci-fi with a romantic quest as he starts to experience strange visions of a woman during his battles. Next up we have Martin Salinas, an eccentric and hedonistic poet. He likes a drink, he likes a smoke, and he's all round a bit of a dick. Now his story dives into the power of art and the influence the Shrike in Hyperion has over him. Next up, we have the scholar and devoted father, Sol. Now, his poignant tale is all around the nature of time, love, and loss. His hit me the most emotionally, it's most emotionally rich, about him just striving and doing whatever it takes to save his daughter. Next up is Hepmastine, a mysterious Templar. Now, I really can't say anything about this character. We get very limited backstory, but yeah, I just can't say anything because of spoilers. Next up is Braun Lamia, a tough and resourceful detective. Now, her story is a real noir story. It intersects with themes of technology, identity, and love. And last but no means least, we have the Consul, a disillusioned former diplomat. His tale reveals deep political machinations and personal vendettas, and it is also about, you've guessed it, love. So what did I like and what didn't I like? What I liked? Well, first off, the writing is absolutely incredible. Just fantastic science fiction writing across the board, and also the different styles, the different genres that each story tackles. You know, we have horror, we have a sort of like crime noir, we have romance. It is so rich and beautifully structured and beautifully woven together. In essence, its form is quite simple, but when you think about everything that's taking place around it, the sort of framing device and world building that's happening, but that's also allowing gaps for these individual voices to take place. Oh, yeah, the writing is stunning. And just to add to how good the world building is in this novel, it is just so vividly brought to life. The universe, this sort of galaxy, this civilization, how they communicate, this sort of like web, which was definitely before its time, which connects all human beings together, and the way that sort of time works and how people age differently when they travel to different sort of galaxies and planets. It is so good. It's just really well structured, brought to life. There is a history and a culture. It even goes back to sort of old Earth and where we came from, and the way it just builds from that. But it does it all so effortlessly. It does it all so easily, as well as having these fantastic individual stories taking place. Wow. It is also so thematically rich, covering themes such as time, religion, philosophy, technology, love. It's got so much going on, and it handles it and it balances it all beautifully. And finally, I absolutely loved the character development in this one. We get to know them all so well, not just in the interactions between each story as they're making their way to Hyperion, but also just how well we get to know them from the stories that they're telling. The way that they tell them gives us an insight into what they're like as a person. And we don't necessarily like all of these characters, but we get to know them so well. We get to feel for them. There are stories in this book that are utterly heartbreaking. I mean, yeah, I don't think I cried, but I just definitely took a moment a couple of times. I was like, whew, yeah, I just can't, I'm not going to ruin anything. I'm not going to spoil anything, but yeah, there are moments that happen that really got to me. What didn't I like? There is nothing I didn't like about this novel. I absolutely loved every single page. However, there are a couple of things I was able to sort of pull out that I think some people might not enjoy. So I am going to talk about those, but yeah, I loved everything about this book and there was nothing I didn't enjoy. So the first thing I'm going to talk about that people might not like is the opening of this book. Now let me break this down. I am always on the search for sci-fi that I think people who love literary fiction will absolutely adore or enjoy, or might be a good sort of gateway book to get them into sci-fi. You know, I don't know, I have this big thing about people who seem to really put themselves in lanes when it comes to their sort of like reading tastes. Now, obviously people can read whatever makes them happy and whatever they want to read, but I do feel like there's a vast amount of amazing literature out there and people aren't reading it just because it falls under a genre that they don't typically read. So I'm always on the hunt for books, specifically sci-fi and horror, that I think people in the literary fiction lane will really enjoy. And this is one of those books. I would absolutely recommend this to everybody who reads literary fiction and is thinking about trying a bit of sci-fi. You have to read this book. The individual stories, what they're talking about when it comes to humanity and religion and philosophy, they are just absolutely incredible, and I think everybody would enjoy them. However, and here's the big however, the start of this book, it's real hard sci-fi. We go straight into it and it is throwing a lot of language at you, a lot of sort of names, a lot of words that I think will instantaneously put off someone who reads sort of literary fiction. I really do. However, I implore you to push past that, to just stick with it. Don't open that first page or the first couple of pages and be like, this is why I don't read sci-fi, I don't get it. Just stick with it. Because once you get into the sort of meat of the story, once we start meeting up with the pilgrims and we start getting their individual stories, you are not going to care anymore. So yeah, that's all I would say. And it's the only negative, because I feel like it starts off in a way that makes it quite inaccessible for your more casual reader. Now, I know there's a few people probably looking at me right now going, really, Andy? Dan Simmons' writing is actually incredibly accessible. And I do get that. However, I know a lot of people who I've tried to introduce sci-fi to, some of the lightest sci-fi, and they've still gone, nah, I just can't get on board with that now, it's not for me sort of thing. So I suppose if you love sci-fi, Dan Simmons is going to seem quite easy to digest, but you know, to your real average reader, I think it's still going to be one step too far until you push past that sort of first sort of 10 pages. And the second thing I think people might not like is the way that this novel ends. It's very open-ended, and of course it's because there is a second book that continues this story. Now, I really didn't mind it, and if you watch that video I recommended from Kieran over at KD Books, you'll understand that Keats's epic poem was unfinished. It also just ends, and I feel like if this book is mirroring that, then we kind of get an idea of why that takes place. However, have no fear, if you've absolutely loved every second of this book, there is a second novel. And there you go, that's it for dislikes, and as I already mentioned, those are things that I think people might dislike about this book. They are not things that I disliked about this book. I thought this book was a masterpiece, an absolute masterpiece. I am giving it 5 stars out of 5. As of this moment, and recency bias will be coming into play, so I will need to take some time, I would say that Hyperion is my favourite science fiction novel that has ever been written. And before I finish, I thought it would be quite fun to do a little ranking of each of the individual stories within this novel, from my least favourite to my favourite. But let's get this straight, I absolutely loved all of the stories in this book. I'm not going to go into too much detail, I'm just going to sort of like name the stories in order. It would be great if you have read this book. In the comments below, could you give me your ranking of each individual story as well? So in last place at number 6, I have The Soldier's Story. Now, this story had some amazing moments of action throughout it. I love the stuff in virtual reality where he's sort of like training to fight, and then the sort of ghosts in the machine that starts happening, and the woman he starts seeing, and then the sort of build of him rising up the ranks and sort of his escape, and yeah, all these things I thought were great. I just like narratively and sort of emotionally didn't connect to The Soldier's Story as much as the others. In number 5, I have The Poet's Story. Now, I absolutely loved how this goes all the way back to when he was a child, his parentage, how he grew. He comes from wealth. He is a wealthy person, and how he is able to have the time to indulge in his poetry and his writing. I loved like getting to know the publishing industry of this universe, which I thought was absolutely fantastic. The only reason this sort of ranks down a little bit is that the ending felt a little bit kind of rushed in sort of what was happening when he goes to Hyperion. And also, he's a bit of a dick, and he did frustrate me at times. In a good way, he's supposed to. But yeah, so that's kind of why this has ended up at number 5. In at number 4, we have The Detective Story. Now, her story is pure noir. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's about her trying to solve a case and sort of falling in love and getting to know this sort of character. Now, I won't go into too many details about this character for spoilers, but the way that it builds, the way it's looking at technology, and also trying to be a detective in a world of such advanced technology, it was great, and I really love this one. The only thing that was kind of pulling this one down from others for me, again, I was really emotionally invested in it, but there's just other stories on this list that just hit me and impacted me more emotionally. But this is a real fun ride, this one. In at number 3, I have The Console's Story, which I just loved for its structure, the way it sort of jumps and plays around with time. Now, the console, he works off on a spaceship, so he goes across the galaxy, and because time is working differently, the love of his life is aging a lot quicker than he does. So we get these sort of moments where he jumps back to be with her, and she has aged drastically, and we're sort of getting these glimpses into how her life has grown, how his children's lives are growing, as he is kind of staying the same age. And I thought that the way it plays around with love, what love means, even though he only had so few moments with the woman he loved, sort of what those moments meant. Yeah, this was a really, really good one. In at number 2, we have The Horror Story, The Priest's Story. Now, this one just got under my skin. It's the first story in the book, and the way the world of Hyperion, this sort of cult, this sort of alien sort of species that he starts living with, these sort of like religious nuts, it absolutely got under my skin. It freaked me out. And the way that it ends, it's dark. But it really, and I was like, it was the first story. I was like, whoa, here we go. It really good. And in at number 1, we have The Scholar's Story. I found this story utterly beautiful. I won't go into too many details because I don't want to spoil things for you. But basically, it's about the relationship between a father and his daughter. And it's what he's willing to do for her, how far he's willing to go to save her. Is just beautiful. I welled up at this one. I put the book down. It really got to me. It's an example of what fantastic science fiction can do. It is so utterly, utterly human. It is a human story that is so beautifully told, but at the same time, it's exploring hard sci-fi, real nitty-gritty hard sci-fi. God damn, it was good. It was really fucking good. So that's why it's my number 1. It was absolutely beautiful. And if I'm being really honest, The Scholar's Story and The Priest's Story, they're neck and neck. They're very close together. On any given day, I could maybe change my mind on the ordering of those two, but they are both just so good. However, I think The Scholar's Story hit me more emotionally. That's why I kind of put it in the number 1 spot. So, as already mentioned, if you have read this book, then can you please do your own ranking of the stories in the comments below? I'm just really intrigued to see what ones impacted people in different ways. And of course, have you read this book at all? If you don't want to do the ranking, but you just want to give me your opinion on this book, let me know in the comments below. I am, of course, going to read the second book straight away. No delay. It's impossible for me to not continue this series. I don't think I'm going to do the third and fourth book because I think they step away from these characters. But for now, I'm definitely going to read this one. And I think The Fall of Hyperion, which is the next one, I'm very excited for that. So yeah, please let me know in the comments below. Lots of things because I've asked you to do lots of things. I hope you're well. I hope you're all enjoying whatever you might be reading. And I'll see you all on the next one.